wipes to all kinds of different cleaning products.
So what do we do about it? Hartman said just using more soap and water would be a good start.
You would want to disinfect if you're in the kitchen and you're doing food prep and you're worried about, I just handled raw chicken and now I'm about to chop vegetables. You don't need to disinfect if you're just sweeping crumbs off your counter.
Whether consumers will get on board, however, may be a different matter altogether. Would you be open to using more soap and water and fewer disinfectants?
No, this is quicker, easier.
Congratulating themselves for moving it through the process with such speed, and then getting other people to weigh in on it. And Jan, you're probably going to ask me, so what? What's the big deal? Well, remember, since its inception in 1947, the CIA has a legal mandate to never interfere domestically, especially with partisan politics. And this letter shows that Gina Haspel's CIA broke that mandate, that legal mandate, and did just that, and her employees went out and had signatories added to a letter that they knew contained false information that Mike Morell wanted out for political reasons at the behest of Tony Blinken, at the time, then Biden's senior campaign aide, so that they could counter the narrative about Hunter Biden's laptop. Remember, that's what it all came down to. And the timeline is critical, Jan. The Blinken contact to Morell is in October, and in a 4-day span, they have 51 signatories. They have the letter approved from the CIA saying you can publish this information even though it's sensitive. The CIA participated in partisan politics, and then candidate Biden used it in a presidential debate and said, our intelligence community even says my son's laptop is Russian disinformation. That is the definition of election rigging. And there better be a whole host of subpoenas going out to Gina Haspel, her leadership team, and every one of those people that have now been identified on that email chain, adding signatures to that letter.
I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned. You said that they knew it was false, and then you also talked about how they really fast-tracked this. And I do want to touch on, sort of the juxtaposition of how quickly a document like this might have gone through versus how slowly, say, a document like your book is going. But let's talk about that a little bit later, sure. Right? At the moment, is there some issue there with the fact that they knew it was false? And as a reminder, how did they know that, and then that it was fast-tracked so quickly?
Well, that's a great point, Jan. How is it that our intelligence agency, our lead intel agency, was able to determine overnight, instantly, that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation? Did they have the laptop? Because by all public accounts, it was at the FBI, lock and key. And they hadn't provided it to anyone else because it was supposedly under investigation of Hunter Biden and related evidence, and therefore they had not distributed it to anybody else. Who at the CIA authorized such an expeditious review? And Jan, having been in government 16 years and having handled matters with Gina Haspel, who, by the way, was station chief in London in 2016, the head intel officer for the United States of America, when the FBI launched its campaign against President Trump to unlawfully surveil him and his colleagues, or his campaign advisors, I should say. Remember the whole Papadopoulos incident? Happened in London under Gina Haspel's watch, and it cannot happen without her say-so. So connecting the dots from her being a political operative back then, in my opinion, to her agency continuing to be a political operative against the same target, President Trump, tells me one of two things. Either everyone in her agency was undercutting her authority and not telling her a single thing about such a high-level, high-octane matter, or I think the more probable and likely believable is that Gina Haspel and her CIA were coordinated in an effort to continue to target a political candidate and misuse, abuse, and break the law as to the mandates of the CIA. There are so many more questions and answers I have right now, and I know everybody's focusing on the contents of the letter and how it rigged the presidential election, but to take a page out of Comer's book today, what's the fix? What's the legislative fix? How did this happen? How did it happen in 2016? How did it happen under Watch as director of the CIA? And how do we make sure it never happens again? We can only get to that if we hold these people accountable. So whoever's listening in Congress, your subpoenas have only begun. We need more live testimony. You need to get every email of every signature on that letter, and everybody, and Jan, this is a critical point. The subpoenas need to go out to get every document, every email, every handwritten note, every letter that back-channeled the fast-tracking of the 51 Intel letter through the system, so we can see who else was in on it, who knew about it, and how far up the chain it went.
Yeah, I mean, with this whole situations, I'm with you. There's a lot more questions than answers, and but I guess there's an opportunity to get some answers.
$3 billion. And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value. As for the peace that we would preserve, I wonder who among us would like to approach the wife or mother whose husband or son has died in South Vietnam and ask them if they think this is a peace that should be maintained indefinitely. Do they mean peace, or do they mean we just want to be left in peace? There can be no real peace while one American is dying someplace in the world for the rest of us. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some debts of all the nations of the world. We have $15 billion in gold in our treasury. We don't own an ounce. Foreign dollar claims are $27.3 billion. And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value. As for the peace that we would preserve, I wonder who among us would like to approach the wife or mother whose husband or son has died in South Vietnam and ask them if they think this is a peace that should be maintained indefinitely. Do they mean peace, or do they mean we just want to be left in peace? There can be no real peace while one American is dying someplace in the world for the rest of us.
Tom Lawley surveil a presidential candidate. Sounds like crazy stuff, right? But we followed the money. Here's the other thing we did. We put out the Nunes memo outlining, akin to what Chairman Comer has done. Sort of put out his, we'll call it the Comer banking memo. And we summarized for the American people our investigation to date. And I think that's a great first step, because as Comer and as then Chairman Nunes and I were talking about, this is thousands of pages of stuff. So it's good to put out a summary on the one hand. But what we also did back then was methodically release the documents in a legal way, so that the American public and the world could just see, oh, here's the banking document, here's the FISA warrant, here's the FBI 2302. You all read it for yourselves and see if our summary document holds water. But the summary is important, because what the summary shows right now is that there was a years-long campaign between at least two countries and the Bidens, Romania and China, more specifically the CCP, and the amount of money to the tune of tens of millions of dollars coming in for what Chairman Comer described as bribery and pay-for-play schemes with not just Hunter Biden, but 8 other, at a minimum, other Biden family relatives. John, that is a massive scale, if true, bribery and pay-for-play scheme, because they're saying, Chairman Comer is alleging in this memo, it happened when President Biden was Vice President Biden. And so just think of that for a minute. In the 21st century America, we have a chairman of one of the most prestigious committees in Congress saying, and I believe credibly, I don't think he's making it up, that during the Obama administration, our number 2 in command of the United States and his family were taking bribes. You know, just let that settle in. I don't want that to happen, whether you're Democrat or Republican or whatever. And so this is the most shocking investigatory work by Congress since Russiagate. And what I want to see on are the banking records. What I want to see are the source reporting that James Comer and his committee have taken in from government and private entities through their subpoena process so that the online sleuths, as we always refer to them as, and the American public can look at them and say, okay, we believe you, because here's what we don't want, Jan. And Comer referenced this in his presentation. We don't want another Adam Schiff moment. We don't want an envelope that's blank, where he lies to the world and says, I have all the evidence, and there's nothing in there.
Well, and one thing I want to mention, and of course we talk about this often on Cash's Corner and American Thought Leaders, there's this incredible citizen journalism and citizen, deep analysis of documentation that's going on as we speak in all sorts of areas of FOIAs, and this is a great opportunity to have the raw information available for some of these sleuths who have shown to be incredibly astute to see what they can find.
I'm all in. I'm all with you, and that's why I think it has to come out in this fashion. So I don't know if anyone's listening over there, but start putting out the documents.
And late last night, a federal judge blocked the Biden administration from being allowed to release migrants into the streets without a court date. We could see this overwhelm and overcrowd detention facilities along the southern border. In El Paso, Texas, Rebecca Castor, Fox 5 News.
All right, Rebecca, thanks. Let's turn our attention to your local weather. And
get in here or anything.
It was awful.
Because it was real sad to see them here, because they didn't have anywhere to go. They were trying to,
And the mayor of El Paso said although he didn't see any big numbers of illegal immigrants coming through El Paso on Friday, he's actually preparing for the unknown.
Because we don't know what's going to happen next week and continue to happen day in and day out. We are continuing to work really close with the Border Patrol. We're continuing to work really close with Customs and Protection, ICE, and all organizations in El Paso. We actually have had a very smooth transition as Title 42 has lapsed and we've gone to Title 8. And that really because we had a lot of preparation. We were ready. We were prepared.
But on the other hand, tens of thousands of migrants are gathered in northern Mexico and will likely be making their way to America's southern border soon. And 2 South Texas counties on the Mexican border declared emergencies shortly before Title 42 was lifted that can free up state and federal resources to help them deal with the surge of illegal immigration. And the flow of illegal immigration may not be as smooth as expected. On Thursday night, a federal judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration from releasing illegal immigrants from the Border Patrol without court notices. Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas says that could cause overcrowding at the processing facilities. That's all we have for now.
Former New York has to counter what she called Beijing's economic coercion against other countries. But for the G7, it remains to be seen if member nations would cut any specific details on beefing up supply chains. For Germany, despite wanting to reduce reliance on China, it's cautious of how Beijing would perceive the action. The Chinese regime could see it as the G7 forging a front against it. China has been Germany's most important trading partner for 7 years in a row. In 2022, the two-way trade stood at over $300 billion. Japan is also skeptical about Yellen's call to restrict investment tied to China. Government officials say that's due to the huge impact such a move could have on global trade. British finance minister said Thursday that G7 must counter China's economic coercion, but he didn't mention investment controls. In response, China on Friday denied using its economic power for influence. Beijing is also urging the G7 to embrace the trend of openness and inclusiveness. A foreign spokesperson, Wang Wenbin, also